Hello everyone and welcome to my Sister Wives For You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Mykelti Padron has never been the loudest voice in the Sister Wives universe, but this time, she didn't just whisper her truth. She detonated it like a bomb straight into the center of the Brown family's already fragile dynamic, calling out what she bluntly refers to as Kody Brown's so-called apology tour as nothing more than a carefully staged performance designed to rehab his image rather than genuinely heal the deep wounds he left behind, and fans immediately exploded with reaction because, for years, viewers have watched Kody blame shifting, rewriting history, and dodging accountability while insisting he was the real victim in the collapse of his plural family. But Mykelti's comments feel different, sharper, more personal, and far more devastating because they come from a daughter who once desperately wanted to believe in her father's redemption arc, and now she's making it painfully clear she no longer buys what he's selling, with sources close to the family revealing that Mykelti has been privately struggling with the emotional whiplash of watching Kody suddenly attempt to apologize after years of emotional neglect, favoritism toward Robin, and outright hostility toward many of his older children, especially those from Christine and Janelle. And what cuts even deeper is that Mykelti and Tony once made real efforts to include Kody in their lives after the family fractures, hoping time and distance might soften him, but instead they were met with the same old patterns of control, deflection, and conditional affection, which only seemed to intensify after Christine's exit from the marriage exposed just how broken the entire structure truly was, and when Kody began publicly acknowledging mistakes during recent episodes and interviews, framing it as personal growth and emotional awareness, Mykelti supposedly felt a surge of anger rather than relief because, in her words, he wasn't apologizing for the things that truly mattered, he was apologizing for the things that made him look bad on television. And that distinction is everything, because genuine accountability requires addressing the private pain inflicted on children who felt abandoned long before the cameras ever caught the fallout. And fans remember clearly how Mykelti once stood awkwardly between loyalty and disappointment, especially during her wedding planning when Kody clashed with Tony and tried to assert control even while being emotionally distant. And now that hesitation is gone, replaced with a firm refusal to accept surface-level remorse, particularly when that remorse arrives only after public opinion turns vicious. And according to those close to Mykelti, she sees the apology tour as a reputational rescue mission fueled by financial fear more than emotional regret, especially as the show's future feels uncertain and Kody's once unshakable grip on the narrative has slipped through his fingers, and it's impossible to ignore that this wave of apologies conveniently coincides with mounting backlash over how he treated Janelle financially, how he emotionally iced out Mary while keeping her tethered for years, and how he openly favored Robin while accusing everyone else of disloyalty, forcing his adult children to grapple with the cruel realization that their father's love often had conditions attached. And Mykelti's frustration reportedly intensified after watching Kody attempt to smooth things over with selective gestures rather than direct conversations with the children he hurt most, particularly Gabe and Garrison, whose emotional breakdowns on screen shook viewers and highlighted just how deep the damage runs. And while Kody now speaks of regret and estrangement with sadness in his voice, Mykelti allegedly views that sorrow as self-focused rather than child-focused, because at no point has he publicly addressed how it felt for his kids to watch their mother be dismantled emotionally while he doubled down on Robin as his only functional wife. And what makes Mykelti's call-out even more explosive is that she once defended Kody when many fans turned against him, urging empathy and patience, which makes this shift feel like the final straw snapping rather than a sudden betrayal. And insiders say the apology tour came too late for Mykelti because years of silence, ignored messages, forgotten milestones, and emotional withdrawal stacked up quietly until they became unbearable. And when Kody finally attempted to show remorse, it felt less like a father seeking forgiveness and more like a man desperate to rewrite the public verdict against him before his legacy is permanently etched in disaster. And fans immediately aligned with Mykelti's skepticism because they've watched Kody deliver long monologues filled with vague regret while still finding ways to blame Christine, Janelle, and even the children for misunderstanding his intentions. a pattern that screams deflection rather than growth. And while Robin has remained largely silent during this latest storm, many viewers suspect she quietly benefits from Kody's revisionist narrative since it minimizes the role favoritism played in destroying the family, and Mykelti's stance threatens to destabilize that narrative further because it exposes how the apology tour feels from the inside rather than how it appears on camera. And what truly devastates fans is realizing that for Kody's children, healing is not about grand speeches or confessionals, but about years of emotional consistency that never arrived, and Mykelti refuses to reward a late attempt at decency with instant absolution simply because it's finally being televised, and her willingness to speak out may signal a broader shift among the Brown kids who are no longer willing to protect the carefully curated illusions of plural harmony that once sustained the show for so long, especially as Maddie, Logan, and others have increasingly distanced themselves from the spotlight entirely, possibly as a way to reclaim peace Kody's chaos stole from them, and Mykelti's commentary lands especially hard because she straddles both worlds, still visible, still connected, yet emotionally detached from the fantasy that her father is suddenly transformed, and while Kody insists he's evolving, Mykelti's words suggest that personal evolution without accountability is just another performance, one designed to collect sympathy rather than repair relationships, and fans reading between the lines sense that Mykelti's anger is not explosive rage, but something far more dangerous to Kody's redemption narrative, disillusionment, because once a child reaches that point, forgiveness becomes an optional feature rather than an expectation, and no amount of televised tears can force it. And when Kody speaks of wanting connection while simultaneously clinging to the same power dynamics that drove his family away, Mykelti's skepticism becomes not just understandable but necessary. A protective shield built from years of watching apologies arrive only after consequences, and as the Brown family continues to unravel in real time, with Christine thriving independently, Janelle carving her own path, and Mary finally breaking free from emotional limbo, Kody's apology tour feels less like closure and more like a desperate coda to a story already written. And Mykelti's decision to call it out publicly signals that the children are no longer willing to be emotional extras in their parents' unresolved drama, and instead are choosing autonomy over illusion, truth over narrative. Mykelti's full rejection of Kody's apology campaign didn't just send shockwaves through the fandom, it cracked open a deeper reckoning about how easily public contrition can be mistaken for private healing, and insiders close to the Brown family claim that Mykelti's frustration has been building for years as she watched Kody cycle through denial, anger, justification, and now performance-ready remorse, a pattern that mirrors what so many of the children have experienced since the earliest seasons when plural harmony was still being sold as the ultimate family triumph, because even back then cracks were visible in how Kody spread his emotional energy unevenly, often prioritizing his newest wife and youngest children while older kids were expected to simply understand and adapt, and Mykelti, like many of her siblings, learned early that proximity to Kody's approval required emotional flexibility that almost always flowed in one direction, from child to parent, not the other way around, and as the years passed the imbalance grew undeniable, especially as Robin's household became the gravitational center of Kody's world, while Christine's home slowly drifted into emotional isolation, a process Mykelti witnessed firsthand as a daughter forced to negotiate loyalty between a hurt mother and a defensive father, and while she initially tried to bridge that gap with patience and optimism, the repeated disappointments began layering into quiet resentment that never fully erupted until now, when Mykelti finally saw Kody's sudden wave of apologies not as growth, but as strategy, carefully timed and carefully worded to soften public backlash that has grown louder with each season, because viewers have not forgotten the rage-fueled speeches, the accusations of betrayal, the stonewalling of adult sons who dared to challenge his authority, and the chilling lack of empathy shown during moments when his children were clearly unraveling emotionally on camera, and when Mykelti now hears him speak of regret, she reportedly hears the same deflections dressed in softer language, the same emotional distancing repackaged as self-reflection, and that dissonance is what pushed her to finally speak out rather than stay silent for the sake of fragile family peace that no longer actually exists, and sources say that her decision wasn't impulsive, but deeply considered. A line drawn after realizing that maintaining the illusion of reconciliation was costing her emotional integrity, especially as she raises her own children and becomes increasingly aware of how damaging emotionally inconsistent parenting can be across generations. And while fans debate whether Kody deserves a chance at redemption, Mykelti's position is far more grounded in lived reality than in theoretical forgiveness, because to her, redemption isn't earned through confessions and interviews, but through years of repaired access, open listening, emotional humility, and consistent presence, all of which she believes Kody still struggles to sustain. And what makes the situation even more volatile is that Kody's apology tour appears selective, directed toward the situations that generated the loudest public outcry rather than the quieter, private injuries that only his children truly carry. And Mykelti sees that selective accountability as fundamentally dishonest because it places optics above intimacy. And in a family already shattered by fractured trust, optics are the last thing that can rebuild what was lost. And as more brown children quietly disengage from Kody's orbit, Mykelti's words begin to feel less like a singular act of rebellion and more like a representative voice emerging from a generation that is no longer willing to normalize emotional neglect under the banner of complex family dynamics. And the irony is that Kody once positioned himself as the champion of honesty and transparency within plural marriage, yet now his own daughter is accusing him of emotional performativity at the very moment he claims to be the most self-aware he's ever been. And that contradiction is not lost on fans who rewatch earlier seasons and see just how aggressively Kody once shut down dissent, mocked emotional vulnerability in his sons, and framed any challenge to his authority as disloyalty rather than dialogue, creating an environment where children learned that emotional truth was only acceptable when it aligned with his narrative. And now that same narrative is collapsing under the weight of collective memory, and Mykelti's refusal to endorse the apology tour accelerates that collapse by stripping it of its most powerful potential validation, the forgiveness of a child. And without that, all the words in the world sound hollow. And while Kody insists that he wants to rebuild bridges, Mykelti's skepticism suggests the bridges were never actually constructed on his side with the same urgency they were on his children's, and the gulf widened with every missed call, every dismissed feeling, every moment when he chose comfort over confrontation. And what makes the current moment so emotionally brutal is that the family is no longer unraveling in theory but in legacy, as grandchildren are born into a fractured structure where the image of the patriarch is contested rather than revered. And Mykelti, now a mother herself, is especially sensitive to that shift because she holds the power to shape how her children understand their grandfather. And she reportedly refuses to wrap that truth in nostalgia that doesn't match reality, a choice that terrifies Kody on a level deeper than any online backlash ever could, because public opinion can be argued with, rewritten, spun, but a daughter's quiet emotional boundary is immovable. And as weeks pass and Kody continues his televised expressions of longing and regret, Mykelti remains unmoved. A signal that emotional inflation has finally outpaced emotional substance. And while Robyn's role in all of this remains a subject of endless speculation, many believe her silence functions as silent alignment with Kody's narrative rather than neutral distance, further convincing Mykelti that acknowledgement is being filtered through self-preservation rather than truth. And as the siblings quietly form their own new versions of family separate from Kody's gravitational pull, the once central patriarch finds himself orbiting the edges of the very structure he once controlled. And the tragedy of it all is that this outcome was avoidable had accountability come before alienation rather than after it. And Mykelti's story now stands as a case study in what happens when apologies arrive after emotional exits have already occurred, when words chase people who have already walked away internally. And no matter how earnestly Kody insists he is changing, Mykelti hears those declarations through the filter of years where change was promised but postponed, acknowledged but not enacted. And as viewers attempt to separate edited television from lived reality, Mykelti's call-out lands as one of the rare moments where the two fully collide, where the public storyline and private pain align long enough to expose just how deep the fractures truly go. And the more Kody speaks of wanting unity, the more his children's independence exposes the consequences of having demanded loyalty without first earning trust. And while the show once thrived on the dream of a plural family defying odds, it now teeters on the far more sobering theme of what happens when power dynamics outlive emotional reciprocity.